All right. And we are live here from Washington, D.C. For this first Polyglot Congress, first day, Saturday, January 28th, 2017. Very happy to be here. My name is Angelo DeLeo. And today I will be talking about how to use culture as a motivation when you're learning a foreign language. And I think it's a very important topic. Specifically, learning culture is a very important topic, specifically because languages and culture are very much intertwined. So I will get into a little bit more about my own personal experience, and then go into more generalizable topics and tips. Just to make sure, I want to make sure that everyone can hear me. I want to make sure that once people start to watch this live stream, of course it's being recorded, so I'm still talking even if people aren't here. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the audio everything's fine? I just want to make sure you can comment, like, whatever you want. I'd like to talk a little bit about my own personal stories, and then we're going to go into some Q&A and some personal interaction with the viewers. I think that'd be most useful. All good there? Thank you, Walker. Awesome. Very good. So, I'd like to talk a little bit first about why use culture for language learning. What is the importance of it? And of course, if anyone in the audience, if anyone viewing or watching has their own answers, what they think is important to learn a language in culture, what can you do to use the culture to learn a language? Please comment that. Comment your own ideas. I'd very much like to engage with you on that, either during or after I finish my presentation. I think it'll be very useful for everyone if I could get some useful feedback, if I could get a bunch of different ideas from all around the world, from different cultures, and to understand a little bit better. But this is going to be based mainly on my own personal experience and how you can use that to continue in your own language study. So firstly, I want to start off here by saying, why use culture for language learning, like I asked before. Culture and languages are very, necessarily connected. You can't have one without the other. I think that if you learn a language without being in touch with the culture at any time, you tend to be very disconnected from how a native speaker actually speaks and thinks. This is not good because when you're studying a language, you might end up talking too bookish, as people will say. You sound like a textbook when you speak without knowing the culture, without talking to native speakers. And so generally what that means is you need cultural capital to use the language properly. So cultural capital is the idea of being able to, manage and navigate a culture. So let's say I'm an American and I want to learn Spanish, and I want to learn Castilian Spanish in particular. In order to fully enrich my Spanish language skills, I would need to, understand Spanish culture. I would need to understand what they believe, what things you should do, what things you should not do. Hi there, Bianca. Thanks for watching. So if I wanted to go to Spain, I would of course have to know the do's and don'ts of the language. I would have to understand, perhaps how they eat, perhaps how their government is structured, or how their work day goes. Because all of this contributes into how the mindset is in a culture, and what they believe about the world, what they believe about themselves, and what they believe about other people, and language learning as well. So having cultural capital is important for any language, and when you're learning a language, it's a little bit more difficult depending on how different the language is from your own native language. For example, if I'm studying Mandarin Chinese, I'm going to have a much harder time finding my own cultural capital than if I were to study Italian and try to understand Italian culture, because they're a lot more similar. Both the languages and the cultures are a lot more similar to me as an American than me as an American to a Chinese person. It's definitely a very relative and important topic but it does depend on the language that you're studying. So basically what I want to point out there is that cultural capital is the basis for all of what I'm about to say. So when you're using cultural capital, you have to think like a native speaker. And that's very difficult. Like I said, if I were to learn Mandarin Chinese, I have to think in a way that's very different, because I've learned Mandarin Chinese and I noticed that when I was learning, you really have to find, you know, the way that native speakers talk, because it's a lot different than a native speaker of English. Um, and you know, I'm not sure if I can give an example right off the bat. Um, oh, hi there. Is it pronounced Raimula? Sorry, I don't speak Urdu, but welcome, thank you. Um, so if I were to, you know, try to speak Mandarin, I would have to learn the ways that people think and form sentences, because the word choice and also the word order and also just the ideas that people say in, you know, in Chinese culture and Mandarin is a lot different than what I would say in American English. You have to think like a native speaker in order to gain that language prowess, and that all starts with having cultural knowledge and cultural capital. So um, I'll go a bit into my own personal experience, starting with Italian and how I broke a sort of mental wall. I think whenever you learn your first foreign language, you go through this process of breaking a mental wall, which that isn't my own idea. I think that originally came from Luca Lampariello, that I heard it from. Um, it's really, you break down this mental wall when you learn your first foreign language, in which you begin to see the ways that language can be different, and through that you also find out how cultures can be different, and you begin to understand more, you know, the world around you, a little bit more about differences and accepting differences, tolerating, and also becoming more open of a person, which a lot of people say that and don't explain what they mean when they say languages make you a more tolerant person. You know, people who aren't into language learning might not understand that. It does have to do with the process of learning a language itself, and then how that is tied to culture also makes you more open and tolerant, because it helps you to understand differences. Um, so the important part of learning a culture is that you can connect to native speakers while in the country, and also, which I'll explain later, outside the country as well. You can meet native speakers all over, from whatever country where you're planning to speak the language. Um, so I think that connecting to native speakers is really the goal here in getting cultural capital. Now, my experience with Italian was definitely a bumpy one, because I was in a very American mindset, where I always thought, you know, why is this so different? Why isn't this like English? Why, you know, I don't understand this grammar. It's just very complex and difficult. And now, looking back at that, I can't believe how silly that sounds to me, because it's very obvious that, you know, different languages are going to have different ways to say things, different grammars, different vocabulary, etc., etc. And so, because, I mean, even Italian was a very easy language comparatively when I moved, you know, compared to when I moved on to Russian, Mandarin, Arabic, and those generally more difficult languages. And it was definitely a learning process each of those times, in learning, you know, how to navigate a culture, and using that to, you know, help my language learning ability. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into my personal backstory of languages. So I'm going to go over basically a very commonly asked question to people who are interested in my language learning, and that is how I started, and also what I do to learn languages. So I'll just start off giving a bit of information. I grew up in a town, a very small town in Pennsylvania, which is a state next to New York City in the United States. So I lived in a city maybe 2 hours from New York City. And I grew up in a very small suburb outside that city that was founded in the late 1800s by Italian immigrants from a city called Gubbio. And Gubbio is about 2 hours from Rome. So it's very similar in geography. I'm about 2 hours from New York City. Gubbio is about 2 hours from Rome. And so I already growing up, I had a very large amount of Italian culture in my household, because my family was ethnically Italian. I had a lot of Italian culture in my household, in my town, but I was never interested in language learning, so I never really picked up, that Italianness. I was kind of still American, in a sense. And so it did not start. I started language learning even in middle school. We had a Spanish class once a week, but I never really got interested in it because I never took a liking to Spanish. I didn't understand the point of it. So I was in many senses I was like how many Americans are in that we know English, so we don't need to necessarily practice another foreign language because everyone speaks English, right? But I learned how important it was once I reached high school. So middle school, studied Spanish, I got nowhere. I learned nothing, basically. I got to high school, and I went to a Jesuit high school. It is a brand of Catholicism, it's called Jesuit, and I went to that school, and Jesuits focus a lot on learning classical languages, so ancient Greek and ancient Latin, or ancient Latin, just Latin generally, since it's a dead language anyway. So Latin and ancient Greek. So my first year in high school, I had to learn Latin. I went through, and all of my classmates hated it generally. I went through and just took the class. We had quizzes weekly. We learned the grammar with a textbook. And every exercise, every homework assignment I did, I looked at this and I said, "Wow, this is really interesting." I I looked at it and I liked learning the grammar actually, which all of my classmates found very surprising. They're like, "How do you like this sort of thing?" So I looked up the grammar, the conjugation tables, the declensions, and every week I showed that in class. I did well on the tests. I had all perfect grades by the time I was done with my first year. And so I said to myself, this is really interesting, and I don't understand, I don't understand what my classmates find so hard about it. I think that it's very interesting, very fun to learn this grammar and to learn, the history behind it, why it exists in the form that it does. And so after I learned Latin, this is Christmas 5 years ago, I asked my parents for Christmas, since we get gifts. I told them the only thing I want for Christmas is this Italian. Yeah, Latin's very, very good. I told my parents that I wanted an Italian textbook, which I found on Amazon. I just looked on Amazon. I found high ratings for Italian textbooks. I looked at that, and a Russian textbook as well. I'll go into that later, but I was also interested in Russian. I asked them for that Italian textbook and that Russian textbook, and sure enough, that's what they got me for Christmas. Um, and I opened it. I opened it up. I'm like, yes, great, I can start. So I wanted to see if I had that same passion and interest with a modern foreign language after I found out that I really enjoyed Latin. Um, and so that Christmas day, and my family hosts my cousins and my uncles and my aunts for Christmas dinner. So that Christmas day and all during Christmas dinner and while my family was there, I had this Italian textbook open. Just I was, pretend this is a textbook. I was just listening. I was just reading all of these grammar notes, and I was studying the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, and I found it so compelling, even just the basics. And from that day on, I just decided that I would buy a notebook. I bought myself a notebook. I studied, um, every single day at my lunch table during my lunch period, and we sat at circular tables. So all of my friends were staring at me while they were talking like I was crazy, because they were all conversing, they were having fun, they were relaxing, and I was here studying Italian at a lunch table. So I took down notes every single day of that textbook, and I finished um, uh, about 6 months in. I finished my textbook. And the reason that I chose Italian first, by the way, is because of me growing up in that Italian community, founded on Italian culture. And I said, there's going to be a lot of people. What's up, Artyom? Diabatia. I, um, I picked Italian because of that culture. For the people from Gubbio, we celebrate every year for religious festival. It's basically religious, called the Festa dei Ceri. It is a very interesting festival where the main idea is we have three saints. We honor three saints, Sant'Ubaldo, San Giorgio, and Sant'Antonio. And we run through the streets of our town every year with huge statues of those saints on our shoulders. We, it takes about 8 men to carry each statue. Um, and it's an honoring of a historical event when Saint Ubaldo ran through the streets of Gubbio to warn the citizens of an attack that they were able to defend. So it's a memorial, basically. It's remembering what Saint Ubaldo did. Um, and every year we commemorate that both in Jessup and in Gubbio. And so it's a very important celebration for my town. And I said, because of that, and because of all the people who speak Italian, I could definitely find someone to help me. I'm 50% Italian. My dad's side of my family is 100% Italian. So, теперь я батя. Yeah, правда. But I was able to, have this support system, let's say. So it was very useful for me. So that's why I decided to learn Italian first. And so after that 6-month period, I wasn't amazing. I was able to speak a little bit. Basically, I made a lot of mistakes, but I continued to improve. After that 6-month period, maybe around a year, I became pretty good, fairly good. I was practicing, but I hadn't really found a native speaker to practice with constantly, and that was my issue. So, like I said, I started with Latin, moved on to Italian, and then after about a year, I found an Italian on an app that it doesn't exist anymore, but her name was Erika, and she was from Sardinia, so Sardinia, an island to the west of Italy. She needed help in English, and this is before I knew what a language exchange was. But she needed help in English, and I needed help in Italian. I said, "Oh, you're from Italy. I'm learning Italian. Could you please help me?" And she said, "Yeah, you're American, right? So you can help me with English." And so we talked almost every day. We switched between English and Italian. I helped her with homework assignments and things, and she just helped me. She corrected my writing. We spoke sometimes over voice. And so during that time, I not only improved my Italian, but I also learned a lot about Italian culture, more than I could find in my own hometown, because we're also American. We're Italian American, don't forget. So I picked up all of these things about Italy, things that she hated about Sardinia, first of all, and how they were how their language was more like Spanish than it was Italian. And then what she liked about, Rome, for example, or Milan or Florence. And I picked up all these things, and I'm like, wow, this is all really interesting, and how it helps me to talk and use the language in a way that I wouldn't be able to without knowing about those cities and their history and the culture around them. And so that's why Italian is my favorite language personally. But that, Italian is very important to me because of that reason. And it was important for my improving because I was able to learn the culture in a way. Through speaking with those native speakers, I was able to find out more about the culture of the entirety of Italy. And of course, Italy, just like the United States and just like many other countries, there's not one uniform culture. There's certain things that everybody does, but there's also in very specific areas, very certain little different things, of course. I think everyone can agree on that. Someone from New York City is not going to do the same thing as a person from Texas. They all different cultural beliefs, different ways of doing things. And it's like that in almost every country that I know. And so I met a lot more Italians during that period, until up to 2 years, when I finally found an app called Hello Talk. And I'll go more into that in a bit, because it's very important to this. But after I learned Italian, and I was using my cultural capital, let's say, to improve more and more. Hold on, Adriana, what other languages besides Italian can I speak? So from best to worst, it's English, Italian, Russian, Spanish, Mandarin, Chinese, modern Greek, modern standard Arabic, and right now I'm learning German. So those are the languages from best to worst. I have a showcase, but anyway, I'll continue with the presentation. If you have specific questions, just wait until the hour's over. I'll get into Q&A and we can interact. But after I learned Italian and got into that cultural capital of Italy and started to learn more and more and improve my Italian at the same time, my actual grammatical skills, How did I proceed from there? I said before that I'm very interested in Russian as a language, and so this comes from a bit of motivation because I used to play video games very much, like war games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, things like that, and they always have the Russian team. They always have a Russian uh, bunch of soldiers who have that voice acting, and so whenever I was playing those games, this is around the time I'm learning Italian, and I have this ear, and I'm just like, wow, that sounds so cool. When they were saying things like "Прикрой меня, я должен перезарядиться," like when they had those weird deep voices, and they were saying things so manly, it was like, oh my god, it was like "Граната прошла," like that, like very overdone, dramatic way of talking. I just said, wow, that sounds really cool. I really like how that sounds. And so that's why I had my parents get me that second Russian textbook at 5 years ago, that Christmas Day. And so how did I proceed? I went on to Russian and I did the same exact thing, basically. I went through the textbook, I studied with the notebook every single day, and I started to learn more about Russia through a lot of friends that I had and met through an app on my phone, which is also very important to this. Like I said, I'll go into that. Um, so Russian specifically, I met two girls. They're both from Chiripovets. Very, it's like a smaller city. One studies in St. Petersburg right now. The other one studies in Guangzhou, China. And I talk to them almost every single day on WhatsApp. I help them with English sometimes, but I learned a lot about the education system in Russia, for example, or Russian food and what they like to eat and how dorming systems work there, and what they think of Putin, for example. And so it's very important, through this native speaker communication, I was able to find out more about Russia as a culture as well, as a country and a culture, and it noticeably improved my Russian and my ability to talk about things in a more advanced way. Because a lot of times you can say things culturally shorthand, let's say, so things that make sense to native speakers because of a cultural nuance, and that happens in a lot of languages. Like English has it as well. American English, there's so many ways to say things in shorthand ways, but that's how I proceeded with Russian. Bodhi, I'll give you, if you want to get asked during the Q&A, I'd love to give you some tips for learning Russian. I'll just go through the presentation right now, and during the Q&A section, you can ask that, and I'll get to it. But thank you for watching. So after Russian, I learned Spanish in high school just because I had to. It was a language requirement. It was either Spanish, French, or German, and I was interested most in Spanish out of those, and I already knew Italian. I thought it would be easy. And so I went through Spanish. So I know Spanish to a pretty conversationally fluent level as well. It's not something that interests me as much as Italian and Russian, and I notice that it affects my language skills as well, because of the ability to communicate with that culture through my motivation. But I'll go more into that as well. So I also moved on to Mandarin. And with Mandarin, it was very interesting because I study in Washington, D.C. currently, and there are many, many Chinese people here, both studying and living and working in the city. So I met a lot of Chinese people while I was here, while I was practicing the language and trying to improve, including one of my best friends now. His roommate last year he's from Guangzhou, and during the year, I was just able to see him watching Chinese movies all the time. He had Chinese food like dried plums, very interesting food. He showed me Chinese food. He showed me movies, music, and also I got to watch the National Day broadcast. There's a National Day in China where Xi Jinping rolls through the town. There's this military there, and it's a big celebration. He watched that streaming on his computer, and I watched that with him. Very interesting. So that same time, I'm here experiencing the culture, even though I'm in Washington D.C. I'm here experiencing the culture through these native speakers who carry all this information with them, and they're very, most of them are very interested in sharing that with me. So that happens a lot through the friends that you make, and also where you're living. If you have people who are from that culture living here, it's very helpful. Another thing that I did is I go to the DC Language Exchange almost every Sunday, depending on where it is located. A DC Language Exchange we're a local group. It's a couch surfing group of a local group of people who want to just hang out a couple hours every Sunday. It's usually at a bar. We go speak the languages that we're learning. We have name tags and then all the languages that we know. Um, and we just talk that whole night. And usually they're native speakers of the languages that you're trying to learn, or they could be people who are really advanced. And so, you talk about a plethora of things. It could be about your own government, maybe the Italian government, if it's in my example with Italian. Or you could talk about what Italians think about food, or like American pizza, for example, because that's a very hot button topic for Italians. And so uh, getting together with groups who are also very interested in what you're interested in is important for learning a culture and keeping motivated in a language as well. Um, Another thing that I'm doing right now, and I did for last year's Polyglot Conference, I learned Greek for a whole year before the Polyglot Conference in Thessaloniki, and there was some step that I took is the incorporation of learning pop music. And I know that Anthony Lauder gave a talk at the Polyglot Conference on using music for your accent, which didn't work out so well for him, but he's talked about research where it does work. I love listening to pop music for pronunciation, listening practice, and also if I learn the lyrics too typically, and I sing along with them. Um, so with Greek, it was very useful for that reason, and I learned all they're kind of funny actually, all the songs that I chose, because they're all pop music that generally people don't like them. But now I'm doing the same thing with German. When I go to Berlin this summer, I'll be using that music both as practice, but also when I go there, I can relate to people by saying, "Oh, have you heard of Max Giesinger?" For example. So I can relate to popular music there and things people know, and that helps me to interact more fluidly with native speakers there as well. So I want to emphasize the importance of language exchange, of language and how language and culture are intertwined. Doing language exchange with native speakers is almost indispensable once you get the level where you can speak, in my own opinion. It was the same thing in every single language that I've done so far. I haven't been able to progress just with the textbook. I use the textbook to learn the grammar, and it's fun while I do it, but after I do it, I really have to practice with native speakers, not just to improve my grammar and my vocabulary, but also to learn about the country, to learn about, the differences in the regions of the country. For example, with Germany, I noticed that there's a big difference between the north and the south. Or it's different in Berlin versus Munich versus places in Lower Saxony. So there's a lot of different types of people within Germany. So there's these subcultures, not just one big culture, but many subcultures. So to learn about these types of things, I need to talk to native speakers, learn their opinions on things, learn about news that's going on there, and generally use the language in a way that I can gain cultural insight. So I think that language exchange is very important. The way that I generally find native speakers is through an app on my phone called Hello Talk. I don't know how many of you know of it, but I think it's a very important app for me, because it's just an easy way to find native speakers, talk to them every day, text them, voice message, you can phone call, very useful. So I use Hello Talk, and then I find someone who I really click with, someone that I get along with very well, and then I move to, let's say, WhatsApp, or I add them on Facebook, or we talk on Skype. So this texting, we get to know each other, and then I eventually start to befriend them a lot. We talk very often on voice, and I help them with whatever language they're learning. I've helped people with Italian, Russian, Spanish sometimes, and English. And they help me with whatever language I'm learning. So currently it's German. So I'm doing this process also with Germans currently. So I'm trying to find that person that I can really get along with, connect to, and that we like each other enough to talk and practice that way. So after that phase, I go and meet them in real life. often I go to the country, and that happened with Greek. My best friend from Athens, we met up in Thessaloniki. We went to the Polyglot Conference together, and we met. We walked around the entire city. It was a wonderful time. We got to speak Greek together. Just an unforgettable experience. So meeting in real life and then being able to ball up all of this experience and putting it into one big travel plan where you can finally go and taste German food, or go and see a musical performance and things like that. Very, very simple but very important things to your language journey, I think. So a couple practical tips now. That was a bit of my personal backstory, but I want to go into some of the um, practical tips that you might be able to use beyond that. So language exchange, very important through my own personal experience. But if I could say one thing, and I touched a little bit upon this, you need to learn the diversity of a culture, not just one specific part. So there's so many different facets of a culture that you can't just learn one region and expect to know the entire culture. I can't learn the culture of Rome and expect to know what people think, or what the culture is in Milan or in Sicily. They're entirely different. Um, so learning the diversity of that culture, not just one specific part, is a very important thing to keep in mind. Something that's useful. You could compare and contrast the parts of the country that you like versus the parts of the country that you don't. And I mean either physically or culturally. So say you don't like, Milan's pizza, but you really like their architecture. Well, you can compare those things. Do you like pizza in Rome, maybe? So you could use these things to learn more about this comparing and contrasting. You can learn more about a culture while at the same time practicing your language with the native speaker. Throat's getting a little dry, talking quite a bit. Um, so my example is Italy, of course, because I'm very into Umbria, which is the middle of Italy. It covers, Gubbio, Perugia, a lot of the places where the earthquake hit near Umbria, that region. So Rome, Gubbio, Perugia, very interested in those cities and that region. But I've been to, Florence, Portofino, Rio Maggiore, and a lot of different northern and a little more southern cities. I haven't been as far as Calabria or Sicily, but comparing what you think, what you think about different parts of that country can help you learn and understand a little bit more the differences in that country, and also get you more into thinking like a native Italian in different ways, or a native of whatever language you're learning. I'm just using that Italian example because that's closest to my heart. And the same thing with me learning German and learning Germany currently, because I had to, look at all these differences, and I'm still looking at all these differences. I don't know all of them yet, but one thing that I noticed is that generally people in Germany think that people in Munich are very, very kind and open, versus people in Berlin are a little bit more reserved, a little bit more professional. And so there's different celebrations in different parts of the country. There's different histories. There's different, there's just different subcultures that make you think this, that make the Germans, perceive this to be true. So people in Munich are super kind and open. People in Munich have Oktoberfest. People in Munich, Bavaria in general, just have that specific dress. That's very interesting. But knowing those different parts of the country helps you in your language learning, definitely, when you're trying to absorb the culture in a lot of different ways. And of course, I want to remind you that this isn't, an immediate process. This can take, years even while you're learning that language and improving. This is not an immediate process. It's definitely a gradual thing that you need to take very slowly, very patiently, but you will reach that goal if you continue to persevere. So as you're learning the culture, you are gaining more insight, and you're trying to improve your language at the same time. You'll notice, hey, I might be getting better at this. I might be starting to understand that country a little bit more, and using that, if you use that encouragement, your self-encouragement as motivation, you can continually drive off of that. It's like a self-correcting system. It's a circle almost. You keep improving at the language, you keep improving at the culture, and it's just like a cycle. It even happens at the same time. Like I said, they're intertwined. So this can happen at the same time, but it is a gradual process, just like language learning. So the next thing that I want to cover is the beauty of the internet for language learners. We have said at previous language gatherings, like the Polyglot Gathering or the Polyglot Conference, that the internet, I don't think there could be a very big polyglot community or many polyglots in general. Of course, it's possible, but less likely that you would learn a lot of languages without the use of the internet. I think that it's crucial to my own language learning. I have used the internet in so many different ways. YouTube, learning music, finding native speakers in different countries in different parts of the world. That's the beauty of being in a little bit of a more global technological era. And so the beauty of the internet is that you have more efficient pen pal making. You can find people in different countries like this. So, not just native speakers, but also people, a community who is interested in the same thing that you are. So let's say you're really interested in Russian culture. You want to learn the Russian language, you want to understand Russia a little bit more deeply. So you can use the internet to find a common group of people who are either learning Russian, or they want to go to Russia, or just different reasons, learning Russian history, for example, or they like Russian movies. You can form a group, you can form a community, you can share your own interests, and you can feed off each other. If you like learning Russian history and someone likes learning Russian cinema, you can teach each other while at the same time practicing your Russian. You can bring in native speakers to that community. You can use native speakers to give you both information on how the country is and their perspective, and you can gain more insight through that way. So it's really important to meet people who share your interests and then discuss with them. It's a very cool thing to be able to do that, especially in the era that we live in. You can do it on Facebook. You can do it on WhatsApp. You can, there's a lot of different apps that you can do it on, and even on your computer, different websites, forums. So that's always important. The next thing, and also is very important, set goals for yourself to go to that country in the future. I think that being able to travel there and looking forward to that is always a really big motivation booster. I remember when I knew that I was going to Italy for the first time, that was 3 years ago, I think. This was after 2 years of learning Italian. So 3 years ago, I went to Italy for the first time, and during that whole waiting period, I was saving up money. I was talking to my parents about it. I was talking to my Italian friends, and I'm just like, I can't wait, to use Italian in Italy for the first time in my entire life, my first trip abroad ever. It was just, I just couldn't wait. And so I just kept forcing myself to practice Italian. I just wanted to get better and get better. I didn't want to look dumb there. I wanted to really impress people. I wanted to learn more about how things are done there. And so when I went there, that's exactly what happened. I found out more about, how things are done in stores, quicker ways to do things that you wouldn't know if you weren't there, probably. The inner problems that the country has. Italy has a very big immigration problem from Africa, and there's people selling fake stuff on the streets all the time, for example. I had no clue until I went there. And so I met a lot of Italians too while I was there. I was the only one who spoke Italian on the trip, so I had to be everybody's translator. So I made a lot of friends, which is good for me. But, I learned, I met people from Pisa. I met people from Siena. I met people from Assisi. And I noticed all these, slight differences, but they were all very interesting. And so I got a broader perspective of what Italy is like by using Italian and making Italian friends. And so that's what I mean. This, having this culture and having this language, they're intertwined with each other in a way that you can just keep using each other. You can each use each of them. So very important. So when you're setting goals for yourself to travel, you're setting yourself up to have motivation to keep learning the language and to keep improving in your understanding of the culture. That's a very important thing, I think. So in general, when you're learning a foreign language, you need a reason and purpose to keep you going. If you don't have an internal reason why you're doing it, then you just, unless you're very good and you know exactly how to do it, and you might have a natural drive, I'm not sure, you're not going to succeed properly if you don't have an inner reason and motivation for doing it. If it's for work, even that's a reason and purpose, but you need a personal motivation, I think. If you have some sort of interest in the culture, if you really want to speak the language for a personal reason, it's generally the best motivation. Instead of choosing a random language and say, oh, let's learn this, that's okay. So I think that's generally very important. When you're learning a different culture and a different language, you always have to step outside of your comfort zone. You need to take part in the practices that you aren't used to. For example, the next Polyglot Conference is in Reykjavik, Iceland. I have looked up Icelandic food. Does not look too appetizing to me because of my own culture and where I come from. For example, shark or sheep's head does not sound like something I would particularly enjoy, but I probably will end up trying it, at least, because it's very important in order to gain this cultural knowledge. Even if I'm not studying Icelandic, but if you are studying Icelandic, this isn't very important. You need to step outside of your comfort zone, because to become more tolerant, open, understanding person, you really do need to understand these differences. And you get two things out of doing this. When you take part in practices that you aren't used to, it does two things. It builds trust with the native speakers of the language that you're around. Because if you're studying Icelandic and you're with Icelandic people and they're eating the same thing, if they're eating shark, for example, and you're just sitting here like, I don't want to touch this, they might think, what is this like what are you doing? Do you think you're better than us or something? Or they might take it as an insult. They might take it as like, this guy's weird. I don't know. So you do have to build a sense of community. You need to connect with these native speakers of the language, and that often involves stepping outside of your comfort zone, doing things that you're not used to doing. I think that's always a good thing. There's always room to learn. And so the second thing that you get from that is that you gain cultural insight and you begin to understand the culture better, because you learn preferences. You learn, the types of food that people eat, the types of cultural thoughts that people have about eating a certain type of food. For example, Italians with pizza and pasta, very, very proud thing for Italians. Definitely, and every culture has something that they really like about their own culture and other cultures and the world around them. And so it's important to know those things. And so, it doesn't have to be food. It could be another example. For example, I'm an American, and so when I see people playing football or watching football, which is what we call soccer, I don't really get into it that much. I'm not super interested in football, but because I study Italian and Spanish and all of these other languages that hold soccer as a very important cultural thing. Even it's just a thing that everybody does generally. Not everyone, but a lot of people. If I'm sitting down, I'll be like, "Oh yeah, Juventus sucks," or like, "Yeah, Forza Roma," talking like that. Because just sitting down, watching it, taking part is definitely a good thing in building community. Gaining cultural insight, gaining cultural capital, building the trust of a native speaker that you're trying to practice the language with, and get more insight about their culture. So those are all very important things as well. So nextly, when you actually do visit the country, you really do improve your language at mega speed if you force yourself to use only that foreign language, unless it's not possible. Like if you really don't know the words for things and you like, say it's an emergency and you need to use English or something, of course. But if you are able to use the language in a certain situation, force yourself to do it. Even if you're not so fluent or confident in the language, force yourself to do it. Um, because something that I found after I went to Italy for a couple times, and even Greece when I went to Greece for the Polyglot Conference, I found that it was amazing how quickly I improved my fluency, how many words I learned, and how I learned to manage the country and the culture and behave, basically, to act like a native speaker in certain personality ways. In certain situations, if you don't know someone, you act differently than if they're your friend. Of course, that's pretty normal. Um, but other situations, if you use a foreign language only in a foreign country, you both force yourself to really quickly improve your language skills, which is beneficial for you, but you also learn how to interact with native speakers in a way that's culturally appropriate. They won't think you're weird. It's more natural. There's differences between what Americans do versus what people do in China, and think is socially acceptable or unacceptable. Um, so cultural knowledge and language improvement often go hand in hand, like I've said multiple times during this talk. Take linguistic anthropology as an example. So I'm studying international affairs, but I'm also studying linguistic anthropology. So very important to understanding culture through the lens of language. So understanding how language and culture are necessarily tied. Um, the biggest part of linguistic anthropology is doing field work and learning about different cultures and their language and what their language use is. When you do field work, you have to live among the people that you're studying, the culture, but the main key is to be considered an insider, not an outsider. Because if you're considered an outsider, they're not going to share information with you that is considered for them, that is considered, out of their reach. They don't need to know that. Why does it matter? When you're considered an insider and when people really like you and consider you a part of their community, you can gain so much more cultural insight than you ever would have if you're just, a tourist only speaking English, running through the streets of the town going, hey, look at how cool that building is. If you're speaking the language, if you're there for a while and you're really interested in learning about that culture and, trying to become a really good user of the language as well, people tend to open up to you a little bit more. They begin to help you to understand these things, and you are starting to be seen as an insider. And I think that's very important, especially in my own personal experience. With Italy and Gubbio, like I was saying with La Festa dei Ceri, when I went to Gubbio for the first time, which was only last May, I was welcomed very quickly because I'm from the sister city. It's very, they already consider me a part of the community, especially because I speak Italian. And so I was very easily able to learn more about that culture and gain more insight about what people do during the festival. How they sing and how they dance and perform music and talk to each other, hold dinners for each other, have parties afterwards. So it's all very important information. Um, there is one caveat, which is, this is very hard to do with minority languages and minority cultures. Very not a lot of people who know that language, or not a lot of speakers in existence of that language. It's easier to get in touch with Spain or Russia than it is with a Native American tribe or the native Brazilian Kayapo. And I use that specific example because it's very important to what I'm going to talk about now. There are still ways to do it, but it's a harder path because you have less people to find. For example, you can't find I don't think you're going to find people who speak the language of the Kayapo tribe on Hello Talk, for example. So it's very hard to find people, of minority languages by its very nature. So it's difficult, but there are still ways you can do it. Listening to their music, watching the culture through videos, spending time in that area if it's possible. If you're studying a Native American tribe, for example, if you can visit there, if you live close to there, or if you're, let's say, I'm not sure, maybe something in Papua New Guinea, maybe a language in Papua New Guinea. If you're there for some reason, if you can live there and learn, it helps you with cultural motivation. When it's a minority language, of course. And when you spend time in that area, you should take part in their way of life while you're there. It's very, very important to, just like I said with linguistic anthropology, the point is to become an insider and not an outsider. So, when you take part in their way of life and live like they live, you start to be considered an insider. You start to learn more about their culture. And I'm not just tying this to culture. Like I said, bringing it back to language, this all contributes to your ability to use the language in a more fluent manner. You're very much able to, if as long as you're practicing in that language and not using English or your native language, you can continually improve almost, to the sky, basically. Um, and so taking part in their way of life, using their language while starting to understand their culture more, you can become a more functional member of that society and improve your language skills at the same time as you understand the culture. So another good idea, learn the history. Brazil's indigenization of the Kayapo. So a lot of times people in Brazilian history, I studied the anthropology of Brazil last semester, and a Portuguese researcher was our professor, and she told us a lot about how Brazil uses a lot of tribes as an example of Brazil's history, looking at, how far they've come, modernized, and what progress they've made. And in a sense, doing that makes it seem as if the culture has never progressed. They've stayed like that for years, and they don't have, there's no history. They're just constant, always the same. But in reality, you know, I've seen the Kayapo have become adapted to video, using video, recording their war dances and their tribal, anything, cultural practices, and they all watch it together, and it becomes a way to reinforce their culture. Um, so in reality, if you say you're studying the Kayapo, I'm using this as an example, if you know that cultural inside information, that how they use video, and how they're perceived by outside forces like Brazil or United States, how people perceive them, and knowing what they do in reality and cultural practice can help you be seen as an insider as well. All things very important to understanding a culture. So I'm about to conclude here, since we are hitting the 50-minute mark, or we're at 52 right now. So in conclusion, language learning is a process tightly connected to culture and getting into the mindset and behavior of a native speaker. I've said this many times, but it really is true, and it should ring true after all of the examples that I've given here. You really have to get into the mindset and behavior of a native speaker. And it goes back to the multiple personality discussion of foreign languages. And a lot of people say, and I've heard this ever since I started learning languages, when you learn a language, you start to become, a sort of, you express yourself in a different way. Your personality changes. And I think that's true to a certain extent. I don't think you certainly become a different person, but you definitely express yourself in a different way just by the nature of the different language. But the reason I believe that happens is because you are slowly merging into trying to understand and work within this cultural framework. So you're definitely trying to learn the ways that people behave, and you start to internalize this. And when you're using the language, you start to become a little bit different. You act a little bit different and express yourself in different ways, which is normal, I think, when you're trying to be considered an insider to a culture and really become like a native speaker, which is generally the goal when you're learning a native language. Doing those things is very, that's typical, I think. And so that all of this goes back to, expressing yourself differently in a foreign language. So I will leave you off with, again, why use culture for language learning? Because it helps you be an insider to that culture and improve your language learning in ways that you would never be able to do without that cultural knowledge. So to people who joined late, I apologize about not that you didn't get to hear some of my examples on using culture as a way to motivate yourself and also to improve your language learning. But this, of course, this will be recorded and put up on the Facebook group afterwards, and I think Jimmy Mello also is going to put it up on the YouTube channel. So generally, that is the presentation that I planned today. I want to thank you all for listening. I will now open the floor to any sorts of questions or things that people want to say. I know that there's about 11 people watching right now. Even if someone's watching this later on, if you have a question that you want to ask, you can post it in the comments. I'm very happy to answer questions. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to talk about? I'm very happy to discuss. And so I'll answer some questions here. So Adriana before said, I just started watching. What other languages besides Italian can you speak? So I answered this during the presentation, but I'll just go over it again. So from best to worst, I speak English, Italian, Russian, then Spanish, then Mandarin Chinese, then modern Greek, modern standard Arabic, and now I'm learning German. So those are the languages at the moment. Is it Bodhi Alonso? Sorry, I'm not sure if I pronounced that name correctly, but tips for learning Russian. Very interesting. I would definitely say use music, talk to people from St. Petersburg and Moscow and learn the different ways of, I don't know, maybe the different cultures there. Definitely use native speakers. Hi there, Emerson. Very happy you could join. I'm very excited for your presentation as well. Welcome. For Russian, I mean, it depends on what facet of Russian you're talking about and what you're interested in learning. Now, relating to this presentation, if you're using St. Petersburg and Moscow as an example, try to talk to people from both of those areas, see the differences in the languages and the cultures, the subcultures, I should say, and that will definitely help you see the different, any sort of different belief structures or the way that people talk in general. If you're talking about more like grammar and things like that, I suppose memorization of tables, that helped a lot for me when I was using my Russian textbook. Memorizing the declensions and conjugations of verbs. So finding a good rated textbook, I also used very much, very important. Thank you, Emerson. I am glad you find this very interesting. I'm sorry you missed the points, but I think I hope I did well. I hope I did well. If anyone has any questions to ask, please pose them. Anything that you want to say, any sort of stories. I'm very happy to just talk with you, things like that. I don't have anything more to say in terms of the presentation. So now we're open. I'm live for the next hour. So any sort of questions that you want to ask, please. Eric, I'm reading your comment now. Hold on. Okay, thanks, Eric. I'm very glad you enjoyed it. I definitely hope I helped with my experiences, and that's really cool. Similar beginning with languages, like you said. So I'm glad that you also started with Latin. Very interesting. Yeah, Irina, how are you? Good to see you again. But Eric, yeah, that's very good with Latin, Russian, Italian. You seem to have the same interests as I do. What online magazine is that, Eric? Could you say the name? If you're going to write about it, I'm very interested in reading. If you could send it to me if you want. But yeah, thank you very much. But yeah, Irina, I know that. So I'll give an example. Irina, when you at my university, when we have a couple study abroad programs in Russia, and when you study in Irkutsk, you have to be at a higher level of Russian. My university requires you to have a higher level in Russian versus when you're going to St. Petersburg, for example, because the director of Russian here knows that people aren't going to speak English. So you really do need to have a high level of Russian in order to communicate there. And so, when you reach a high enough level, you are going to go to, if you can go to a place where English isn't spoken, even in my personally, welcome Jimmy, by the way, glad you can make it. Um, when you go to, like I went to Thessaloniki, and not many Greek people speak English there. I'll be honest. I got off on the plane. I got off the plane in Thessaloniki Airport. We went to go to get our bags, and I sat there waiting for my bags. And a Greek woman, came up to me and asked me in Greek, "Is this the flight from Frankfurt?" And I'm like, because I hadn't. This is my first time I've ever been in Greece. I just walked off the plane. I've never used Greek in Greece before, and the first thing that happens is a woman comes up and just starts like frantically, "Is this the flight from Frankfurt?" And I go, "Ναι, η πτήση από τη Γερμανία, ναι." And so I'm just like I'm fumbling with my Greek, um, and and later on I noticed the same exact thing. Um, I had to go to a restaurant with I was with Artyom. I was with um, a whole group of people, Ruslan Kokorin, and we all went to a Greek restaurant. They didn't have menus in English. The waiters and waitresses did not speak English. I was the only one who spoke Greek there, so I had to order for the entire group. And I was just saying, get the souvlaki kotopulo, get the chicken souvlaki, because I'm just like I don't know many of these food words, so I'm just like I know this word, just get this, it's good, it's whatever. So that's what they got. So that whole time, like I said, this goes back to if you can't use English and you're forced to use the language that you learned. I improved so much by talking to that waiter we went there multiple nights. I learned so much from talking to that waiter who was taking our order. I just talked to him. I became friends with him for a while, and I improved my fluency, my use of the language. It wasn't perfect. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I improved a lot. I got a lot better by the end. I was only there for 4 days. So if I can improve that much in 4 days, imagine how much you can do, staying a month there, just using that language and being able to do that. So if anyone has any other questions, I'd be happy to ask. But Eric, parrot time, I'll take note of that. Um, if you write about this, I'd be very happy to read it. If you want to send it my way, I'll be available to read it, definitely. But anyone have any other questions? It's funny because hi Karina, how are you? It's funny that a lot of people here are joining after the presentation is over. So I'm sorry that I couldn't make the main points when everyone was here. But if anyone has any questions on using culture and language, you can go back and watch the presentation afterwards as well. I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards. So Paris asked a question here. So do you find your family also is interested? No, I am a rarity in my family. No one in my immediate family speaks a foreign language at all. They only speak English. I don't think I know. No, my first cousins, my parents, my aunts and uncles, they all only speak English. So, it's very odd when everyone else speaks English, and has a lot of them have never left the country. Some of them have, not everyone though. But it's weird when everyone speaks English and then all of a sudden I come along and I'm like, "Hey, I want to learn, 20 some languages." And my family's just like, "Huh?" So, yeah, Karina, I hope you will find the video interesting. Sorry that I couldn't show you the points now. But thank you very much. But yeah, it's a rarity for me in my family because no one speaks a foreign language. And it's a shame. I really would like to be able to share that interest, but it's definitely a rare thing, unfortunately, for my family. Um, and I think it's very common in the United States for that to be the case. Not There's a stereotype that Americans don't like learning foreign languages, and unfortunately, I think Tim Donor said in a video that that's not true at all. I would heavily disagree. I think that that's generally true. Generally, certainly not in maybe New York City or Washington D.C., but in my small town home that I come from, it's definitely the case. Um, and so, it's not a rare thing. Hi there, Gashbeen. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. I am not Muslim. No, I am Christian. I said earlier in the presentation, I went to a Jesuit school, so it's a branch of Catholicism, and that's how I became introduced to Latin, moved on to Italian, and then that was the beginning of my language journey. Do I try to learn the language to upper intermediate or fluency level? So, thank you. Is that Nadezhda? That just looks like a Russian Nadezhda, right? You too, Gashbeen. Thanks for watching, like I said. So, Nadezhda, do you try to learn the language to upper intermediate or fluency level? Generally, I do. I don't. I don't typically just start a language, learn it to A2 level, and then stop. I typically do take it all the way. Thank you, Andy. I'm glad you're watching from Miami. I'm up here in Washington, D.C. It's probably warmer down there. But I typically take it to a point where I can express myself in a very easy manner without having to struggle. Greek right now I think I'm like middle intermediate. I have not reached the level of upper intermediate yet, but I'm getting better. I do need to practice my oral skills, definitely, but right now that is my progress. I don't typically I don't end at a basic level. I try to keep on going, and even after I start another language, I keep maintaining my other ones and trying to improve. Not every single one. I do have to prioritize a little bit. Like right now, I'm learning German, but I'm improving my Greek. But I'm keeping my Italian, my Spanish, my Mandarin at a steady level, at least. I'm not forgetting. So I'm using a lot of different, um, different methods. Music and talking to people, and it's mostly talking to people. But hi there, Raul. In what way did you first approach that native tribe in Brazil you talked about? What were your first impressions? So, this is a bit of a long story. Hold on, I just need to put my phone on my charger. 1 second, because I don't want it to die in the middle of the presentation. That would be embarrassing. So, hold on here. Okay, good. So, in what way did I first approach the native tribe in Brazil that I talked about, and what were my first impressions? So, I was talking about the Kayapo, and so the way that I first came, in what way did I first approach? In what exactly do you mean? Because I studied it in my class that I took last semester. It's called Anthropology of Brazil. It was really anthropology of Latin America, but it was focused on Brazil. So we didn't learn much about the rest of South America and all the Central America, the Caribbean, etc. It was mostly Brazil. So we were studying a lot about Brazilian history, and it involved Brazilian identity, and that had to do with Vargas's march to the West, a lot about whitening ideals, different ways of describing your skin color, and all depending on who you're talking to, who you are, and so we talked about a lot of different cultural beliefs about race and some different religions. Like candomblé, like a syncretic religion. We talked about evangelical churches. So one of the topics that we talked about were indigenous tribes, and the way that a lot of, like in Brazilian culture, and also, I'm not sure who they're used by. It might be the government. It's like a sort of ideological thing. I'm not entirely sure, but using tribes and Indian, as they're called, Indian reservations, to say, look at how far Brazil has come. Look at our history and how modern we are now. Look at our progress. and in reality, they're overlooking their, the ability of the tribes to progress and adapt to modern technology and how they've changed over this time. So I guess my first impressions, I mean, when you first look at them, it's like, wow, these people are so primitive. They have these weird you know, traditions that I don't understand. They seem dangerous. Like one of them was like you had to like stick your hand in a wasp nest or something like that. I don't remember. So it seemed very backwards. Basically, you thought like, oh my God, what is going on? But then, seeing the ways that they adapt, and they're actually like, there are people who dress in Western looking clothing, like me, go to Brazil, talk to a banker, and then come back and get back in the Kayapo dress for cultural and historic and whatever reasons, because that's their tribe. It's just so it's more so about just the culture. It's not they're just backwards people who don't understand modernity. It's just that's not what it is. So it's interesting to me. It's something I'd like to learn a little bit more about. But that's why I used that example, because I think it's definitely important for the purpose of this presentation to find out which ways you can understand culture and use culture as a motivation and understand people in a different way, which is all grouped up into language learning. When you learn the language, that's what you're doing essentially. So I hope I answered the question, Raul. Thank you for the question. Thank you for watching. Gashbin, yeah, you can add me if you'd like. That's fine. Um, are there any other questions? Any other things that people have to say? I'd be very happy to answer and talk with you all. I mean, even now in Washington D.C., there are a lot of people say that New York City is the multicultural hub and center, but I mean that's true. It's New York City is definitely one of the biggest places for finding different cultures and languages in the world, but Washington D.C. has so much to offer that I've found out, and there's so many different cultural restaurants here. There's parts of the city. There's a Russian area. There are there's a Chinatown that I go to sometimes for food and practicing. Of course, it's mostly Cantonese, but there are Mandarin speakers there. So I go there, and you can find a lot of different cultures. Italian. There's a lot of Hispanic, Latino people here. A lot of Spanish speakers generally. So it's a great city for learning cultures and things like that. Um, Wang, any plans for learning Icelandic? Good question. I haven't considered it as much as I did with Greek, because it's a lot to like for my purposes. It's a lot more difficult and time consuming um, to learn Icelandic. I would really like to. I find it interesting, but I think I'll only learn, let's say, I don't know, maybe basics or something like that. Because don't forget that Icelandic, of course, this goes against everything I've said, but in Iceland, a lot of people speak English well. Because I would really like to learn the culture, but at the same time, don't forget that it's a very, very long process, and I have less than a year to you know do it because of the conference. I will be going to the conference in Iceland, so I hope to see some of you there. But as of right now, I don't think I'll be learning Icelandic seriously. Maybe in the future. I don't knock it out. I think it's definitely a possibility. But right now, I want to focus on German and Greek. Those are my two right now. Afterwards, I'm going to start improving my Chinese to a higher advanced level, and then Arabic. So I'm going to be working on a couple. I have a very specific plan for myself right now. Nadezhda, where have you been in Eastern Europe? What is your experience there? I know that for a lot of Westerners, there's a culture shock, and people describe it as gloomy Gotham City. What's my opinion? Unfortunately, I have not traveled to Eastern Europe. I would like to, because even in Washington D.C. in my building itself, I have a lot of people from Eastern Europe, and previous Soviet states as well. Um, So I mean Greek and learning Greek and going to Greece is my most large Eastern European experience, which isn't much because it's not Uzbekistan, it's not that like that whole area, Kazakhstan and that too. I have a friend who's from Kazakhstan, and I hear a lot of things about it all the time. I see pictures because I have friends like Amir. Some of you might know Amir from Kazakhstan. He's a great guy, and he puts up pictures all the time, and it seems really nice there. Actually, I've never thought of it as gloomy Gotham City. I think that generally news media might like, for example, Belarus. Like people are just like, who the hell wants to go to Belarus? Like people put that up, like it's on the news and things like, oh, look at this, like this Soviet government, controlling its citizens and that sort of. So you do get that in the media, I think. I don't typically think of it that way. I'd really love to go and travel there and see what it's like. Um, of course, I don't really have any plans to like learn those languages like Ukrainian or things like that. Don't interest me as much, but still, yeah, I suppose Kazakhstan is more towards the Asian side. I guess you're right, but still, nonetheless, like Belarus, Ukraine, even I mean, I'll be going to Slovakia. Maybe that counts. I don't plan to learn Slovak though. Maybe a couple phrases, but so thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Nadezhda. But yeah, post-Soviet countries, I've seen, for example, Connor Klein goes to a lot of them. He's very interested in post-Soviet countries, and I see his videos all the time about them. It seems really nice there. So I don't typically see it as that sort of thing. Let's see here. Next thing here. So, Andy, that's why I would like to move to a city like yours. Unfortunately, here in Miami, we don't have that diversity, only Latin culture, most of it. Yeah, that's a typical thing. I think that's what Miami is actually known for. Um, I don't think it's a lot of cities are multicultural. Like San Francisco, I've seen has a lot of diversity in it, cultural diversity. But hey, maybe in the future you'll get the opportunity to come to either New York City, Washington D.C., something like that. If cultural diversity and linguistic diversity is really what you're looking for, definitely. So uh, I wish you the best there, Andy. Karina, do you think it's important to have a native accent? In the context of this presentation, yes. I think that improving your accent is almost as important as learning the language and the culture itself. I am at my university. I'm the president of GW Polyglots, which is helping the student body to learn languages, improve the way that they do it either on their own or in courses. And we had a presentation last semester by Idausa Ness. He came to Washington, D.C. to give a presentation on his method, his mellow method, for learning languages through rap, musical tone. And it's very interesting the way that he did it, because the way he described it is that when you relate to someone better when you sound like them, not just speak their language. There's a certain degree of connection when you speak the language and you're using that language, because there's the very popular Nelson Mandela quote, head, heart, you know it, so I won't repeat the whole thing, but um, he said that it's very important to speak it with a native accent because it makes you more of an insider. Like I said during the presentation, when you are able to connect to someone's culture, you are being an insider. You are considered an insider, not an outsider. And so I think it's very important to sound, at least try. You're not. I don't think you're ever going to sound exact 100% like a native speaker. Your accent can be very good. You might slip up sometimes, but the more close that you sound to a native speaker, you are going to connect to them and get more insight into their culture and be able to improve your language experience that way too. So the more effort you put in, and I think that accent is very difficult because you do have to make sure that when you're first learning the language, don't skip out on pronunciation. Don't say like, it doesn't matter that much, because in reality, you're setting yourself up to have a not native-like accent if you aren't paying attention to your pronunciation, because you get used to talking in a way that doesn't sound like a native speaker. You're getting used to it. So you have to train yourself first to have a native-like accent if you want to be able to connect to them that way. So I think it's personally important. I try to be good with accents. I don't always succeed, but I don't like, for example, many of my classmates back in high school, we learned Spanish for 3 years, and then at the end they go, "Hola, señor, puedo ir al baño?" And it's just like, why are you even? It sounds uppity, but I think that when you try to learn the accent, you do connect better. So I hope I answered that question. Karina, thank you very much. Um, Jimmy, wonderful, wonderful thing here. Based on your present experience, how long would you say it's necessary to reach a survival level, and how long to reach B1 level? It depends on what you mean by survival level, because sometimes I think that survival level is B1 depending on where you are in the country. Like Irina posted before, if you go outside St. Petersburg and Moscow to like the countryside, no one speaks English. So to survive in those areas where no one speaks English, you will need to have a very high language level. But let's say survival level is A2, where you can say some things, the phrases, it's okay. I think I reach A2 in, maybe, 4, 5, 6 months. It depends really on the language, depending how different it is from English, which is my native language, of course. So, it would take maybe only 2 or 3 months for me to reach A2 level in Portuguese versus, if I were to learn Japanese, it might take me up to 6 or 7 months. That might be an exaggeration too. Maybe 4 or 5, depending on how much time I put into it, how I learned specifically, my method. B1 is a little bit different. I typically would say around a year. That's my estimation. In my own personal experience, maybe to learn B1 to mid B1 level, so halfway to reaching B2, maybe around a year and a quarter. It really depends on how much you're studying. And I think that it's important. I said this in an interview with Fast and Fluent at the Polyglot Conference in Thessaloniki. I was interviewed by a woman named Joanna for Fast and Fluent, a French language learning group, organization, I guess you could call it. And she asked me what my language learning tip was to people. And I said, it's definitely about how frequently you study, not how much you can study at one time. So, if I study 5 chapters of a textbook in one day, that's gonna go out of my head the next day. So it's really not worth it. As opposed to if you study 1 chapter for 5 days straight, you will retain that information a lot better. So it's about frequency. It's not about how much you learn at one time. So because it's necessary to do it frequently instead of not a lot at once, it's important to keep in mind that it's going to take a longer time. So to reach B1 level, if you're doing it frequently every single day, you're learning a chapter a day in a textbook, it might take you a little bit of a shorter time, maybe 8 or 9 months. But say you're doing like 5 minutes a day on Duolingo every day, it might take you up to a year and a quarter or a year and a half. It really depends on what pace you're setting for yourself. And that's okay. You just have to set your goals. If you're looking to go to the country within a year and you really need to make serious progress, then you need to adjust yourself accordingly. You need to make sure that you're progressing in a way that you want to reach, a certain goal. It's just so I would say, survival level. If we're thinking like survival level is A2, maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and B1 maybe anywhere from 8 months to a year. That's my estimation. It really depends on the person and the language, but generally. Hi there, Edim and Hakar. That is that is the second time I got that question. I'm not sure why people think I'm Muslim. I'm not Muslim. I am Christian. I went to a Jesuit school. As I said earlier in the presentation, I went to a Jesuit school. That's why I started with Latin, and why I continued on to learn Italian, Russian, and all my other languages that I know now. So it's because I went to a Jesuit school and studied Latin. So I'm not a Muslim now. Ooh, I'm talking a lot today. Talking a lot today. Does anyone have any other general questions? If anyone has any questions about the presentation, please ask anything about culture, or if you weren't here for the presentation, if you want to ask me other things, if you have any questions about language learning in general, I'd be very happy to talk to people about that as well. I think it's a very interesting topic to cover. So if anyone has any language learning questions, very, very happy to answer those too. It's a nice day here. Very nice day in Washington, D.C. I remember the other day I was at a food truck. It's called Tasty Kebab. It's Mediterranean. I remember there was a Spanish-speaking woman there, and I had to help translate into Spanish what the workers were trying to have her get. They were having her get food for them, like at another food truck, and I had to translate into Spanish what they wanted to eat. I was just like, oh, papas fritas, you know, that sort of thing. My Spanish isn't wonderful, but I can get by. I'm going to Peru in March, so hopefully I'll get some good practice. Have I decided what my next language will be and why? Yeah, Jimmy, I've started studying German. So I started studying German already. I've been studying it for about 2 months now. That was after Greek. And German, because I've always been slightly interested in it. And I'll be doing 2 Germany trips. I'll be going to Berlin this summer. I'll be going to Berlin for a little bit of a vacation. And I want to be able to speak German while I'm there, learn more about the culture, possibly make some friends, and learn just generally about the country too. So I'll be doing that, and then afterwards, the year after, I'm going on another Germany trip to Amsterdam, Berlin, and Brussels with some of my friends from home. So some of my American friends, and so I plan to make sure that I'm very good at German by that time too. So hopefully, I'm at like you know, wir Erfolg mit Deutsch. So I very much enjoy German. My vocabulary isn't great yet, but I hope I will be improving. I have a couple German friends already. If anyone wants to practice German with me, if anyone's a native speaker of German that's watching right now, add me. I'd love to talk to you. But yeah, I'm learning Deutsch right now. So ich lerne jetzt Deutsch. Anyway, Karina, another question. Thank you. Traditional or simplified Chinese? I made a pause on it just because I don't know which one to take. I find plenty of material on the internet, but it is hard to select good ones about it. Okay, interesting question. I think it depends on what part of China you're interested in, because you need to think, they use traditional Chinese in Taiwan and they use it in Hong Kong. If you're planning to go to Shanghai or Beijing, you're not going to use traditional Chinese that much. A lot of mainland Chinese people don't even know how to write traditional Chinese. They might be able to read it, but I think that if you're looking to learn Chinese because you want to go to mainland China, simplified. So basically what people said on the internet when I started learning Mandarin is, oh, learn traditional, because once you learn traditional, it's very easy to learn simplified. I tried to learn traditional. It's really hard. And I would have continued if I didn't. I'm not that interested in Taiwan or Hong Kong specifically. So I didn't really see a purpose in doing something that's extremely hard and then not getting that payout from it. I wasn't getting as much in return. So I just went with learning simplified Chinese, learning to read and write simplified. And it really, I don't regret it. I think it's pretty simple. It's a little bit of pun there. But I think it's a simple decision. If you're wanting to go to Shanghai or Beijing or whatever, Guangzhou, maybe those different cities, definitely simplified, especially because the majority of mainland China speaks or not speaks, but writes with simplified. Especially if you meet someone like on Hello Talk. If you meet a native Chinese speaker, they're going to be writing to you in simplified. So it's just easier. I think it's easier and more convenient. That's what my recommendation would be. I hope I answered that in a meaningful manner. I hope I could help. Any other questions, comments, concerns? We have about 30 minutes left for my time slot. Thank you all for watching, by the way. I very much appreciate you viewing, you liking. If anyone was interested, I do have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page at so Pervoy DeLeo. So PERVOIDELEO is my YouTube channel, and then my Facebook page is Pervoy Language. So if anyone's interested in following my progress on they want language tips, I have a bunch of videos on there. I'll try to upload more often. It's a little hard because I'm also a university student, but I do try to upload as much as I can. So I'm very interested in helping people to learn, helping to motivate, definitely. So thank you all for watching. This really helps my own goals to help you, of course. Thank you, Jimmy, for allowing me to be a speaker today. I hope the presentation was very useful. Just general things. Yeah, Karina, no problem at all. So does anyone else have any other questions? Or since we're 30 minutes away, if anyone has any personal if anyone has like personal stories or personal experiences with learning a culture, or like times when you had to know the culture to use the language properly, or you used the language to learn culture, if you want to say anything about your own personal experiences, I'd be very happy to listen and read what you're saying. I think it's really cool to hear your own experiences. Hi there, Skylar. Which language would you suggest for a beginner? English speaker. Very broad question. Let's think about this from an objective standpoint. Now, first of all, it depends on what language you're actually personally interested in and culture. But let's say you have no direction and you just want to learn a language, but you're not sure which one. If you want an easy language, now this is relative. Easy language is a very misleading term. For English speakers, for a native English speaker, it's going to be a lot easier for you to learn Spanish, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. So the Romance languages, French. German is a little bit of a step up. Then you get farther. Greek is a little bit harder. Turkish, those sorts of Russian is also in that category. Then you get to the super hard ones for English native English speakers: Arabic, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin. So if you're looking at it from an objective standpoint, if you want to go into your first language and break down this mental barrier that you have, if you're monolingual, that is, I'm not sure if you are or not, but if you're monolingual and you really want to learn your first language, I found that learning Italian helped me quite a bit, because if I started with Mandarin Chinese, it's so much harder that I probably would have failed. I probably would have just been like, I can't do this. It's too much. It's too confusing. I don't want to discourage you from doing that if you're interested in Mandarin. If you have definitely a personal motivation to do it, then do it, definitely. But I didn't have that personal motivation for Mandarin. And so if I did not have those skills and I didn't have that cultural understanding about differences and how to learn a language and why to learn a language that I learned by learning Italian, I probably would have failed with Mandarin. So I think that's very important. So I would recommend maybe a Romance language. If you wanted a suggestion, maybe Italian. I love Italian. Italian's my fave. But yeah, that's what I would recommend. If you have an interest in another culture, let's say you really like German or you really like Russian, try it. I think it's definitely. I don't think you should limit yourself to something that you think is just going to be easy. I think if you have a personal motivation, then you should definitely try to go at it. And I'm not sure if is it Jolien or Jolien. I'm not sure the pronunciation of that. Sorry, but German and Greek have cases. The Romance languages don't. That is correct. I don't personally think that cases are too hard, in my own opinion, just because the first language that I was interested in was Latin, and that, oh boy, does that have cases. That has cases different for adjectives and nouns, and then there's verb conjugations. Oh boy, yeah, it has conjugations and cases. So it's not hard for me. I think it's actually a little bit fun, being able to conjugate. And Russian has conjugations and cases too. Um, but yeah, it typically makes a language a little bit more confusing to use. Uh, Eugenio, I am at work, but could follow your speech for a while. Congrats! I just can't imagine learning a language without getting used to its culture. Congratulations! Thank you very much. I'm glad you've been watching. I don't mean to distract you from your work, but I'm very happy that you tuned in to watch and appreciate what I have to say. If you have anything that you want to add, Eugenio, please talk and say what you want to say. Definitely. Thank you for watching. But yeah, learning a language and tying it to the culture, always the most important thing to do when learning a language, in my own opinion. Marco. Hola, hola, salut, salve, hello, hello, hey, привет, ni hao, and the last one I don't know. Terve? Is it Swedish maybe? But hi there. That's my response. Hallo. Wie geht es Ihnen? I'm just desperately looking for a German practice partner. It's very hard for me to find a German native speaker who wants to talk to me every day, because in my experience so far, German people are very reserved. They're very professional, and so I want to be able to have a friend who doesn't seem so uptight all the time. But hold on. Raul, thank you for your answer before. I guess the tribal members were used to being perceived a certain way. And du Deutsch lernen willst, bist du bei mir richtig. I'll help you if I can. You might guess that I'm a little bitter about this, but have you ever been made fun of while learning? My background is Spanish, but everyone in my family speaks English. Instead of giving good feedback from me, many times native speakers just laugh at mistakes. When trying Spanish or anything else, I can't see the rest of that comment. Sorry, it cuts off, and I can't click on it anymore. Maybe if I try something else. I can't see the rest of the comment. I'm sorry about that. What's your opinion on home polyglots? Could you hold on? Yeah, Raul, could you possibly like copy the last part of that comment in another comment so I could see it? So when trying to learn Spanish or anything else, do you E dot dot dot? That's all I see. Just to make sure, I want to answer your question. Yolian, what is your opinion on home polyglots? Do you mean people who only learn languages at home and don't connect to other like native speakers or anything like that? Is that what you mean? I just want to make sure I understand the question before I go into the answer. My throat's hurting. I've been talking for a very long time now, but I'm very happy to be here nonetheless. So what you said before, Raul. Let's see here. Yeah, a lot of Raul, what you said before, a lot of native speakers do typically they either speak English with you when they realize you're not good at a language yet, or they might laugh at mistakes. I think you just have to find people who are understanding. And the best part about language exchanges that generally people aren't good at your language either, or like not perfect at least. So they'll understand you making mistakes because they make mistakes too. They understand that process. So my opinion on home polyglots, I suppose if you're interested in languages from the linguistic side, if you're interested in languages for their formation, if you're interested in languages for their verb forms, for their cases, if they have cases, or just the fact that they've transformed through history and changed, sure, you can learn languages at home and not connect with the culture, but I think that's, in my own opinion, I think that's missing the point. Because uh, I'm not a linguist. I'm a linguistic anthropologist, if I were to say. I'm very interested in the way that languages interact with culture, not just the verb forms. I think Idausen Ness at his presentation at GW Polyglots last semester, he said, "I don't learn languages, I learn people," which is a little bit cheesy, but he did say that, and it rings true. Um, it's definitely true that um, you should try to interact with the culture if you want to use a language in real life. And I think that is very important to understanding different cultures, understanding the world in a different way, in a more open way, not from a one-sided view of your own culture. So, I mean, I'm not it's okay if you want to do it, go ahead. It's not my choice, but I think that it's more important to use languages outside the home. That's my own opinion. Übung macht den Meister. I love these comments. So when trying Spanish or anything else, do you ever get unconstructive criticism? What do you do? So I uploaded my language showcase, my language monologue, a couple of years ago on YouTube. It's not up on anymore. I have a new one. If you want to go watch it, it is up on YouTube, my new one. But my old one, it wasn't great. It wasn't everything that I wanted to express in my own language abilities. So I posted it on Reddit, the language learning subreddit, and a lot of people just said, "Oh, his Mandarin is terrible. His Mandarin sucks," or like, "What? I don't even know what the hell that pronunciation was in Italian," and things like that. So there's only so much you can do with that. Yeah, at least it does tell you that you do need to improve. I already knew that, but it is a confidence killer. I think you need to stay focused on why you're doing it and not listen to, people who are just trying to put you down for no reason. There might be a different reason for that. Maybe they're insecure about their language abilities in other areas, maybe. So you need to focus on your own personal motivation for learning. You need to keep your focus on why you want to learn. So for me with Italian, I always knew why I wanted to learn the language. So I never forgot that. Even when people said, "Oh, you're saying this bad," or "What the hell are you talking about?" or "Your accent sucks," I never give up. It's a matter of having the motivation, and you do need to keep that reason in here, you know. Karina, I'm learning German. It is hard when there is no native person around. So you should try out Hello Talk. I would try out Hello Talk if you want. Download it. See if you can find someone. But German, I find that German people are very notoriously hard to find. And yeah, I agree with you there. Let's see. Yolian, I should explain the term my invention, polyglots who cannot travel or live in foreign countries. Ah, okay. That is different. Polyglots who cannot travel or live in foreign countries. That was my case for a while. I didn't have the money nor the time. I do have, since I work now and I can make my own money, I am able to travel more. But for me, it was the same thing. I learned the culture through the internet, basically. The internet, watching music videos or listening to movies or TV shows, whatever. And I learned the culture that way. And I became a pretty culturally fluent person without ever having been to Italy. Of course, it improved. And when I went to Italy, and I think that you should always go to the country if it's possible. I think it's always the best thing to help with your language learning and understanding the cultures when you're actually there in person. But if you can't, I mean, that's not, first of all, it's not your fault. It shouldn't discourage you. And I think you can become a culturally fluent person without having to travel to that country. I just think that traveling to that country is very, very helpful and helps you progress to understanding the language and the culture at the same time. So nothing wrong with it. If you can't, then you can't. But it's if you have a passion for language learning, that's the main thing, you know. So Emmanuel, you could have several language partners and try with all of them in different days. That worked for me. Yeah, that's a good idea. If you A lot of people try to schedule a little bit more, so you know, Monday this language, Tuesday this language, and you could potentially have different language partners for that. I think that's not a bad idea. You could try a lot of different things and see what works for you. I don't Once I get past the studying grammar, I don't typically structure myself as much. I try to let it be more spontaneous because it's more fun for me. I think it's more fun when you don't know what's going to happen once it's new and exciting and that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, that's what I think. But yeah, if you think structuring it could work for you, then definitely try it. I think it could work out for different people. Different people have different interests. But yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. Jimmy, she learns at home and don't usually travel. Only learn for pleasure and practice over Skype and things like that. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with it. Use it as you prefer, but be sure to finish at the right time because we have another speaker after you. It's a great talk. Thank you for that, Jimmy. I appreciate the compliment. I just to let everyone know, I have been accepted as a speaker um, for the Polyglot Gathering. So if anyone is going to Slovakia in June, I will be there as a presenter. Hope to see you all there. Thank you very much for your encouraging words. I thought that was great advice. I'm living in Germany now. I'm also not reserved at all, so I'd be glad to talk. Yeah. Raul, if you want to contact me after, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm not generally as reserved as the German people that I've talked to, but you do have with this talk you do have the opportunity of being in that culture when you're learning the language. So you could use some. I mean, I hope the tips that I provided perhaps have allowed you to find different ways. Since you live in the culture, maybe you can use it to your advantage. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, Jimmy, I will save this and publish it after it's completed. So, Christina, I'm the other way around. When English speakers are in Spain, I ask them which language they prefer to use because I know in most cases wherever they go, they're asked to use English regardless of which country they're in at the moment. Yeah, that's very true. I think that people who are more used to language learning are typically going to ask, you know, do you prefer using Spanish or English? But I think that generally, and the large majority of people, at least in my case, if they know you speak the language very well, then they'll speak it with you. But if they realize that it's going to be an issue, they don't want to waste their time and effort. So they're just going to say, use English in order to communicate. Because a lot of people think that language learning is all about practicality, using it practically. Like, oh, that's why we only speak English because like, why do we have to use a foreign language? Everyone speaks English. It's not just about practicality. It's about personal development. It's about forming relationships with people who think differently than you, which is all about which is what I think language learning is about, and polyglottism and having this lifestyle. I think it's very important to keep that at the center of your beliefs. Not just, I want to go to a country, so I'm going to learn German. Like if I want to go to Germany, so I'm going to learn German, so I could use German. You're missing the point if if you just want to communicate like that. You have to make sure that you know, you're doing it to both become more mature, more tolerant, more accepting, more understanding. Um, and then you can use that drive to understand the culture and things like that. So it's very good. I'm very happy that you asked their preference. That's a very good thing, Christina. And also thank you for watching as well. We have 2 minutes. Does anyone have any final questions? Very happy to finally conclude. I've been on here for a while. If anyone has any final questions, I'd be happy to ask. I'd be happy to answer. But there is another presenter here that's going to take over soon. So make sure you tune into that too. This is a very great event. I think it's very useful for people. Thank you, Karina. Thank you very much for watching. 1 minute here. I mean, if anyone has any other comments, questions, or actually we have a little bit more time. I just realized it's only 3:49. I have until I have until 4 o'clock Eastern time, right? Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. I tried to plan it as best as I could to fit the interests of the group and something that I thought would help others. So, you know, talking about my own personal experience and then going into some useful tips that I think are generalizable. I think you can typically keep them general, but yeah, I'll stay live. I think if Jimmy is still here, I think I have until 4 o'clock, the 2 hours, right? So if anyone has any other questions, if not, definitely, if you have any questions afterwards that you might have forgotten after this video is uploaded to the Facebook group, send the questions and I'm happy to answer. I'll answer afterwards if I can through text, or if you want to send me a message, I'm also open to that regarding the presentation. I'm very happy to answer questions based on that. Yeah. So I noticed that a lot of my friends ended up coming into the presentation. So I know that Artyom did, Irina, Walker. So very happy to see that too. Very happy to see that. So just to make sure, Jimmy, would you prefer that would you prefer that I finish early so that the next presenter is he in 10 minutes? So would you prefer that I end early so that it can transfer properly? Walker, do I have any interest in learning Portuguese? Probably in the future. I don't think it's not a possibility. Right now, I'm focused on learning a couple other languages. German right now. I'm going to focus on my Chinese, my Mandarin Chinese, that is. Then go on to Arabic, learning modern standard Arabic, and then going on to a dialect. Probably Hijazi, which is the western coast of Saudi Arabia. I'll probably learn that dialect. And then afterwards, probably Japanese. I think, but that's my language learning thing right now. So that's going to take up the next couple of years. But I will consider learning Portuguese in the future. I think it's a cool sounding language, definitely different. So I would consider it. Yeah. So if there are no other questions, yeah, like Jimmy said, just to make sure we have enough time for the speaker, the next speaker, I will be finishing this up here. I really appreciate everyone watching. I hope I answered the questions. I hope I provided some helpful and useful information. And you know, best of luck in the rest of your language learning. You will be able to see me at the Polyglot Gathering. I will be there as a presenter talking about language ideology and how you can promote language learning in your own community, and people who aren't polyglots like us or language enthusiasts like us. So thank you all for watching. This is Angelo DeLeo signing off from Washington, D.C. And best of luck to all the presenters in the rest of the Polyglot Congress. I know it's going to be a great event, so I'll see you all later. Thank you very much, everyone.